I appreciate Majority Leaders bringing the Green New Deal to a vote today so that every senator had an opportunity to go on record. I voted no. Some of my Democratic colleagues may argue that a vote against the Green New Deal demonstrates an unwillingness to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels and to tackle serious environmental issues of the day. But nothing could be further from the truth. Contrary to popular belief, the United States is not a bad actor on the world stage. The United States has reduced our carbon emissions by 758 million metric tons per year since 2005. This is the largest decline of any country in the world. Meanwhile, China and India's carbon emissions have grown. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, the United States' consumption of biofuels and other renewable energy has more than doubled from 2000 to 2017. The United States will only continue to increase renewable energy consumption through 2050 as we see more investment in wind, solar, biomass, geothermal, and other alternative energies. So let's be very clear. A no vote on the Green New Deal is a vote against a government takeover of our economy that would stifle economic growth, bankrupt our nation, and endanger the prosperity of all Americans. A no vote is a vote in favor of continuing an open and free economy that has made America the richest country in the world. And we find that the best way to do environmental improvement is to use the wealth of a nation to accomplish that goal. And a nation becomes more wealthy, the more apt they are to have the ability to protect the environment. The fact is that the Green New Deal is wholly unrealistic in its goal of obtaining net zero carbon emissions within 10 years. We're not going to be successful at reducing our dependence on fossil fuels and lowering our carbon emissions through virtue signaling. And that is all the Green New Deal boils down to, virtue signaling. It is all lofty goals and aspirations with no concrete plan or concern as to its feasibility. It is easy to support a vaguely worded, non-binding resolution calling on the federal government to accomplish certain goals. But guess what? That's us, we in the Congress. Congress is part of the federal government with the responsibility under our Constitution to write the laws. If members of Congress have concrete ideas about what the federal government should be doing, they should introduce real legislation detailing who should do what to accomplish these goals. Instead of a green dream, as Speaker Pelosi called the Green New Deal, we need to focus on common sense, bipartisan approaches that have an actual shot at making a difference. In other words, a resolution is a resolution. It's not a law. It doesn't accomplish anything. It states out these goals that we ought to seek, but nobody's come forth with a concrete plan to accomplish those goals. Cutting taxes is an effective way to encourage positive, environmentally conscious ways to produce electricity and fuel. This is what I have sought to do as a leader on renewable and alternative energy production for decades now. I was the original author of the production tax credit for wind energy in 1992. It won me an award of Father of the Wind Energy. Now, I suppose, 25 years later, I'm the grandfather of the wind energy approach. During my leadership on the Senate Finance Committee during the early 2000s, I oversaw the establishment, the enhancement, and the renewal of numerous tax incentives that promote clean energy from sources such as wind and solar, to renewable fuels like biodiesel, to energy-efficient buildings, homes, and appliances. Unlike the aspirational goals of the Green New Deal, these proposals I've been a part of are real, proven, bipartisan actions that I helped shepherd into law to make the United States more energy independent and at the same time improve our environment. Renewable energy is a very smart investment and the fastest growing source of electricity generation in our country. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, utility-scale solar power is expected to increase by 10% in 2019. That's 1 year alone, while wind power is expected to surpass hydropower for the first time. As prices continue to fall, the economic benefits from these clean energy investments will obviously increase. Already, Iowa leads the nation for its share of renewable energy. Iowa's wind generates nearly 37% of the state's electricity from wind, and the state's largest utility, Mid-America, is set to generate 100% of its electricity within just a few years. Iowa ranks first in the nation in the production of ethanol and ethanol and biodiesel. Iowa alone accounted for over 26% of the entire U.S. ethanol production and over 17% of the U.S. biodiesel production. The solar industry in Iowa continues to mature and ranks 17th nationally. The bottom line now is renewable energy helps diverse Iowa's economy. It creates jobs in rural America and strengthens U.S. energy independence. And as far as the jobs are concerned, I believe it's about 7,000 just for wind energy, 43,000 for biofuels. Instead of trying to build on these and other proven policies, the authors of the Green New Deal are more concerned with trying to correct all the ills they see in the United States economic system and even our broader society. So it's not just about environment. Here's a list of the grievances that they want to attack in the name of an environmentally sustainable economy: life expectancy, wage stagnation, economic mobility, income inequality, systemic injustices, the oppression of indigenous people, the unhoused, and the list goes on and on and on. Now, just in case I might be taken as a person who doesn't care about all those things I just listed, in other words, don't get me wrong, these are important issues that deserve our attention as a nation. But it is simply not realistic to believe that they can all be solved through a plan that targets environmentally sustainability. And of course, since no crisis should be allowed to go to waste, every aspect of the progressive agenda must be implemented to fend off the threat of climate change. According to an analysis by the American Action Forum, the portion of the so-called Green New Deal plan focused on eliminating carbon emissions, that program by itself would cost between 8 3/10 and 12 3/10 trillion dollars. Of course, that's assuming it's followed up with actual legislation that attempts to implement the goals that it lays out, and I've pointed out how that legislation's not being brought forward. But those figures account for only a fraction of the Green New Deal's costs. The portion about the progressive economic agenda that includes enacting universal health care, free college tuition, a federal jobs guarantee program, and much more is estimated to cost somewhere between $43 and $81 trillion. So that would put the total cost of the Green New Deal at somewhere between $51 and $93 trillion over the first 10 years. Now, $93 trillion, kind of hard to imagine. Can you imagine that? That is more money than the United States government has spent in its entire 230-year history. How would we even go about paying for this? Several Democrats have floated ideas or introduced bills that have gone along the lines of taxing the wealthy, that I assume may make up some of their possibilities. Earlier this year, the House author of the new New Deal suggested imposing tax rates of 70% or more on earnings of $10 million. Here in the Senate, Senator Warren has proposed an annual wealth tax of 2% on assets of $50 million and 3% on assets of over $1 billion. Not to be outdone, Senator Sanders has introduced legislation to supercharge the death tax with rates as high as 77% of estates exceeding $1 billion. More recently, Congressman DeFazio reintroduced his proposal to tax security transactions. Now, think about this. Even if we assume that these proposals would not have detrimental economic or behavioral effects, which we all know they would have these effects, these taxes would not come anywhere close to covering the price tag of the Green New Deal. The Washington Post reported that a 70% tax rate on incomes of $10 million could theoretically raise $720 billion over 10 years. Senator Warren's own estimates suggest her annual wealth tax proposal could raise as much as $2.75 trillion in a decade. According to Senator Sanders, his death tax proposal would raise $315 billion over a decade, and Congressman DeFazio, transaction tax is estimated to bring in $777 billion. So add that all up. Even under the rosiest assumptions, these senators' proposals combined would only cover between 5 and 10% of the dreams of the Green New Deal. The fact is, there are not enough millionaires and billionaires in the United States to cover the price tag. So eventually, they start taxing the middle class. So this reminds me of when you think about these socialist ideas, reminds me of former United Kingdom Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's wise observation. And I quote now, according to Margaret Thatcher, "The trouble with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money. That's the end of the quote. Many of the Green New Deal backers appear to realize this and have even suggested that offsetting its cost is unnecessary. According to these authors of the Green New Deal, it can be paid for simply by printing more money. Yes, you heard me right. Printing more money. Their solution is the same as what has been tried by every bankrupt third world country around the world. Just crank up the printing presses. The poster child for this fantasy in the world is, today at least, is Venezuela, a country rich, great economic vitality in the 1970s, probably even sooner than the 1970s. But that economy has been driven into the ground by socialist policies, financed in a large measure by churning out currency, leading to multi-million% inflation rates. I hope now that senators have had an opportunity to go on record in support or opposition to the resolution, the nonsense that is the Green New Deal will be put to rest. Hopefully, we can all now rally around sensible, proven policies to secure our energy independence and to improve the environment. And from my point of view, that's the United States continuing on the success we've already had, but standing as an example for China, India, Indonesia, Brazil, and other countries. Affordable, clean energy is key to moving the United States forward. A good starting point would be to enact tax extenders legislation that I introduced last month with Ranking Member Wyden. This legislation would extend nearly a dozen separate, practical, and proven incentives for renewable energy and energy inefficiency. Investing in alternative forms of clean energy is good for the environment, good for national security and energy independence, good for job creation, particularly in rural America. It's good for economic development, and surely good for the taxpayers. And it's obviously good for attacking climate change. I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.